So the big final 4th DLC wave of Tree Houses, known as Cindered Shadows, finally hit us, and now I imagine most of us are done playing through it. Whether you are one of those people who clicked this video just to hear my opinions on it, or if you're still on the fence about getting it and want to know if it's worth your money, this video is for you. Today I'm going to give my full thoughts on Cindered Shadows, what it did right, what it did wrong, and if it's worth the money. So stay a while and listen, let's get to it. Now, before we begin, a little warning, there will be minor spoilers in this video in the form of the gameplay footage being shown in the background, but I'm going to make sure that the big story spoilers is left towards the end of this video. When they appear, you will be given a warning with a timestamp to jump to if you want to experience this story fully on your own. If you're just interested in my final verdict on whether or not this DLC is worth buying, you can jump to this timestamp here. So first, let's talk exactly about how Cindered Shadows operates. Unlike what I previously thought, this is not something we will be experiencing in the main story. You access it directly from the menu, and the story begins right away without you needing to start up a new game. You pretty much head into Abyss within the first few minutes of gameplay, and you'll encounter the Ashen Wolves shortly thereafter. While you are down in the Abyss, there is no option to leave, and you will have to stay here for the full duration of the side story, though you will at certain points go up and interact with the characters above ground. Once you are done with the side story, you will be able to start up a new playthrough and recruit the Ashen Wolves into your house, just like you would cross-recruit any other student from any other house. They have requirements you must meet, but it shouldn't be too hard for you to get them if you really try. In total, there are 7 maps for you to play through, as well as an area to explore in between the chapters, just like the monastery. And the whole experience will take you around 6 to 10 hours to complete, depending on how fast you play. The only 2 difficulties you can select are normal and hard mode, with the option of casual and classic mode. Hard mode in this story provides a slightly bigger challenge than vanilla hard mode in the main game, and you will have 5 turn wheel uses per map to help you out. While you are down in the Abyss, you will not be doing any tutoring. The characters all have a preordained set of classes which you can swap between, but you won't be able to give them any new ones. However, they will level up like normal. In addition to the new students from the Ashen Wolves, you will be able to play with Byleth, Claude, Edelgard, Dimitri, Ash, Linhardt, and Hilda. The resources, like weapons, gold, and ore that you acquire in the side story will be limited, though I never really felt pressured in any way. You shouldn't worry too much about it. There are vendors to purchase stuff from, and you will be able to replenish your battalions, though to my knowledge there is no way to acquire new ones. Also, your Sword of the Creator will repair 5 durability in between each chapter, so feel free to use it a little more than you normally would. To my knowledge, none of the decisions you make down in the Abyss will change your experience, nor will it impact the main story of the next game you play. Regardless of the choices you make down there, you shouldn't miss out on anything. The story is pretty linear from start to finish. Even if the student seems to be unlocked gradually as you play through the story, I don't think there's a way to screw up and fail to get them. So with the details out of the way, let's talk a little bit about the good and the bad of this DLC. The main selling point of Cindered Shadows are the 4 new students from the Ashen Wolves: Yuri, Balthus, Constance, and Happy. And they are all great. Yuri is an extremely intriguing character with a great design that really captures your interest early on. Balthus is a lovable brawler that gives me serious Hector vibes. Constance is absolutely spectacular, and Happy, the one student I thought I would dislike, is actually hilarious. There is no question for me at least that this DLC absolutely nails the students, and I think many of these characters are already fan favorites for many players in the community. The music is also spectacular. Even if there's not that many new tracks, the few that are added are absolutely astonishing to listen to. Sadly, my praise for Cindered Shadows kinda ends here, because there's a lot this DLC did not deliver on. The story in particular is quite horrendous. Practically Fates level cringe during certain parts of it. But I'm gonna go on quite a tangent here later, so that will have to wait until the spoiler section. So let's begin by talking about the maps. If there is one thing Three Houses has been thoroughly lambasted for by critics everywhere, it's how much it blatantly recycles its maps. And while there are a few new original ones in Cindered Shadows, I am afraid that most of them are sadly recycled as well. Though, many of them are given new skins with altered colors to try and gloss over this fact, making them at least look different. But I think this almost feels a little more deceptive to the players than anything else, like they're just giving an old car a new coat of paint and selling it to us as a new one. For DLC worth $25, I do find this thoroughly insulting. I don't know how much resources it takes to design a map in Three Houses, but I actually would have been fine with this DLC having maybe 1 or 2 less maps in total, if we could just have all new ones without any recycles, because I'm starting to get very tired of fighting on the same maps time and time again. The maps themselves are very challenging, and all of them have some sort of unique gimmick to them. There's a particularly intense escape chapter where you are chased down by a golem that certainly got my blood pumping, but in retrospect, a lot of these maps are not spectacular in their layout, and I think they could have done so much more with them. Still, it's not something I'm overly critical about. They were still fun to play for the most part, but I have no desire to go back and play them again. The final boss fight was certainly interesting, and while I'm not going to show any footage of that here since it belongs in the spoiler section, it certainly was very long, which is more than I can say about most other Fire Emblem boss fights, so I guess that's a small point in its favor. I also want to talk briefly about the Abyss, that is the area you explore in between battles. It's really small. Like, really small. It's about roughly the size of one of the medium areas in the monastery. While exploration isn't my favorite part of tree houses, I do wish that they would have made this area at least a little bigger, but this is a minor gripe at best. So now begins the spoiler section. If you want to experience the story of Cindered Shadows on your own, please jump ahead to this timestamp. For the rest of you, let's begin with a very short recap of the events that transpire. The story begins with Byleth, Claude, Edelgard, and Dimitri all chilling around the monastery when they notice a shady figure heading down into a hole in the ground, and they decide to follow. They bring with them Ash, Hilda, and Linhardt, who all happen to walk by and are curious about what they're doing. The party then ventures down into the Abyss, where they meet the Ashen Wolves, who attack them. A brawl ensues, and after being beaten, the Wolves decides to join up with the main party, thinking they can't be all that bad if they're this strong. Down in the Abyss, we find out that some mercenaries and phantom soldiers are attacking the Ashen Wolves for unknown reasons. After dealing with them, we are introduced to Alfric, the caretaker of the Abyss, who, while masquerading as a good guy, is secretly kind of evil. He manipulated all members of the Ashen Wolves to come together so that he could use their holy blood to perform a creepy ritual to revive Byleth's mom, who he had a big crush on back in the monastery when she lived. In order to perform this ritual, a divine chalice is needed, but after we're done obtaining it, Alfric fakes his own abduction to draw the students out into the open to grab the chalice for himself. The monastery and the Knights of Seros tries to intervene, but fails to stop him as he sort of fulfills his ritual, but it backfires horribly, merging Byleth's mom and himself into a terrible demonic beasts which Byleth and company have to destroy. Afterwards, the Ashen Wolves are disbanded and are free to live out their lives in freedom. The end. So on paper, this story isn't actually all that bad. It introduces the new students in a kinda okay way and ties Byleth into the plot by involving his mother. But the real problem with the story is that it isn't executed all that well, and there's many gripes I have with both how it's told and how it plays out. In particular, the setup leading into the Abyss was, and I excuse the pun, abysmal. Prior to the stream starting, I made a joke that it would be hilarious if how we stumble upon Abyss is by Claude finding a hole in the ground. And that was kinda what happened. While I appreciate the story starting off quickly and getting the wolves involved at once, I do wish there was a little more suspense leading up to the discovery of the Abyss. One of my big gripes with the story is also how the main cast are completely shoved to the sidelines. We finally get an entire story with Claude, Dimitri, and Edelgard all together in one group, which is something that we've never seen before. But because the Ashen Wolves hog the main spotlight, these three lords are basically reduced to background noise, with only Claude occasionally chiming in with a joke or two. I personally would have loved to see more interactions between Edelgard and Dimitri, or just more scenes with the three leaders together, because that's not something we get to see a lot of. I understand that the 4 new students are the main selling point of this DLC, and I don't really mind them getting a lot of the attention. I just think it's really sad we didn't get more scenes with the 3 lords, because I really do love seeing them together like this. Speaking of characters I would have loved to see more of, why on earth wasn't Geralt more involved? This story takes place somewhere between after Byleth gets his Sword of the Creator, but before he merges with Sothis, and this means there's a chance Geralt is still alive and kicking up at the monastery. With the story centered around the revival of Byleth's mother, it is absolutely atrocious how Geralt was not at least given a small cameo in this DLC, aside of a single CG showing him alongside his wife. Having Geralt be playable and seeing him interact not only with Byleth, but the rest of the cast, including the Ashen Wolves, would have been really nice. But I think the reason why Geralt was left out was because he would most likely have stolen the spotlight away from the Ashen Wolves, seeing how connected he would be to the story. And since Byleth isn't really capable of reacting to things, that would have left Geralt displaying a lot of the anger and emotion, and that probably would have overshadowed the Ashen Wolves, which the developers probably didn't want. Instead of that, we get this weird double turn with Yuri tricking everyone, shifting the focus more onto him and the Ashen Wolves and their connections with Alfric. But I honestly think it's a big missed opportunity that Geralt wasn't at least a little bit involved with this story. I also want to talk briefly about Alfric and his role as a villain. Now, this guy being secretly evil was about as surprising as Geralt dying in the main story. We all saw it coming from a mile away. Hell, I called this guy out on being evil from the moment I read his character profile on Twitter. In fact, me and Cyan managed to predict the events of this DLC down to every last detail, including Alfric secretly wanting to revive Baleth's mother, and we even predicted how he manipulated all the students into joining the house. The only thing we didn't see coming was Yuri's double betrayal, but aside from that, it was so incredibly easy to predict the story. Now, regarding Alfric himself, he is just a very lacking villain. His design is kinda forgettable, and he just seems kinda creepy and weird. Not really imposing or dangerous like you'd expect a villain to be. And while it is kinda tragic how he loved Baleth's mother and never got to be with her, it's hard to sympathize with his goals when they're really just crazy. Now, if you want to do the whole reviving wife storyline, why don't you take some inspiration from Orson and Sacred Stones? That storyline was executed very well, and had a much greater finish. I mean, who here aren't still haunted by memories of the first time they encountered Darling, 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 Darling? They should have done something similar here. It would have been cool. Lastly, I want to talk about how the events of Cindered Shadows basically happens in its own separate pocket dimension with no attachment to the main plot at all. Now, in case you don't know, if you boot up a game after completing the DLC and head down into the Abyss to recruit the Ashen Wolves, they talk to you like it's their first time seeing you. There's no mention of the adventures you all had together, it's like none of it ever happened. And I understand why the game developers had to do it this way. Now, if the students of the Ashen Wolves had actually acknowledged the events of Cindered Shadows upon you meeting them, it would present a serious problem of continuity in the timeline, so it had to be treated like it never happened. But part of me just thinks that's really sad. We've gone on this grand adventure with the Ashen Wolves, and when you boot up a new game, it's like none of it was real, like it was all just a dream. It certainly makes the ending of Cindered Shadows, where Rhea gives the students their freedom, seem quite hollow, because when you meet them again, they never got that pardon. While I understand that the side story being separate from the rest of the plot is necessary, this is only because the game devs desperately want you to be able to recruit the Ashen Wolf students as early as possible next time you boot up a playthrough, so practicality comes at the cost of the story in this case. Personally, I think there are so many other ways this story could have been woven into the main game. Like, for example, when Byleth falls into the canyon right before the time skip and mysteriously vanishes for 5 years. That would have been an excellent way to introduce the Abyss, as he is literally falling down into it. It would explain why he was gone for so long, and would just open up a lot of possibilities. Of course, this would mean excluding Dimitri, Edgard, and Claude, as well as many other characters from the story, but I honestly felt like those characters didn't add much to begin with, and this way, the entire spotlight can be cast upon the Ashen Wolves. Not only would putting the side story in between the 5-year gap of the story give us a nice break, giving us some time to actually miss the students before returning back to them, but it would also tie into the main story in a logical way. For people who didn't purchase the DLC, they would just never experience it. For everyone else, there could be an option to skip it if you want. And if you're worried about players who don't want to play through the entire pre-time skip game to get there, they could have easily just allowed players to access it through the title screen like they did anyway, giving us the option to just play it exclusively on its own. So to summarize, I think that the story of Cindered Shadows left a lot to be desired. It was something we had anticipated for a long time, and while it wasn't always terrible and had its moments, it felt very lacking in its execution. It had a lot of opportunities to add to the already rich story of Three Houses, and it really didn't pull that off for me. But of course, you are welcome to disagree with me in the comments if you want. Anyway, let's move on to the final verdict. So the big question that I think is on everyone's minds, or at least the ones who have yet to play Cindered Shadows, is, should I buy this DLC? Is it worth the $25? Now, first of all, I want to say that I think it's a travesty that you can't buy Cindered Shadows on its own exclusively for a lowered price. Lots of people want to play this DLC, but aren't particularly interested in the extra monastery outfits or things such as the sauna. So why not just allow people to make their own decision on what to buy, rather than forcing it all down our throats as a bundle? As for Cindered Shadows itself and whether you should purchase it or not, it really depends on what kind of player you are. If you are a die-hard fan of Three Houses, desperate for more content, you should absolutely get it. I think you will be thoroughly entertained. If there's a route you have yet to beat in the game, this gives you a brilliant excuse to go and do that with the 4 new students on your team, as it will provide you with an excellent new experience, especially as all of the 4 students have fully fleshed out supports and post-time skip designs, and you can customize them freely in the main story, so that will definitely enrich your gameplay experience. However, if you're lukewarm on Three Houses and wasn't spectacularly impressed with the game, I don't think this DLC will do much to win you over. I think you're better off just watching someone else play it. $25 may be pocket change for some people, but it's a lot for others, so if you find yourself strapped for cash, I say maybe save it for something else, because this won't rock your world. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Cindered Shadows. Do you agree or disagree? feel free to leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, and I'm sure the discussion will be very civil. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, leave a like and a comment if you enjoyed the video, it really helps out the channel a lot. Subscribe for more Treehouses content, and I hope to see you again soon. My name is Mangs, and goodbye.